We are moving swiftly on via Pink Floyd's Any Colour You Like. Anybody guess that one? Hope so. So, Any Colour You Like, this panel is called Making a Grade Great. Forgive my puns, I did these a few months ago. And when I look at them, I go, why did I think of that title? Anyway, this is a panel about colour grading and the role of the colourist, and I think that's the overall term, isn't it? The colourist in a post house, which is maybe not let's say, the sexiest job, just having come out of a panel on cinematography, but certainly. Well, no.
Without the colourist, that film wouldn't look so great.
Well, exactly. That's exactly what I wanted to say. But you do sit in a dark room a lot. But the colourist is the person who makes your rubbish film turn into something watchable. So, you know, you need to get to know these people. So we've got three people on the panel. Once I get to the right piece of paper, excuse me. So we have three people on the panel. On my right, Katherine Jamieson, who is a colourist at Halo Post. Halo Post is a London post-production house, a friend and supporter of DocFest. We're very grateful for that. Katherine was telling me she uses something, I don't really know what it looks like, called a new coder. Is that right? That's right, yeah. A new coder. Other people may know what that is. I've never seen one to do her work. And you've previously worked your magic on series like The Real T-Rex, or quite recently The Real T-Rex with Chris Packham, and The Pilgrimage, The Road to Santiago. I hope this panel isn't going to be as demanding as the Road to Santiago. And then on my left, I have Samuel Francois-Steininger, who runs composite film in Paris, and that's a transmedia studio specialising in colorization, but also in animation and in short films. I saw the one you did recently called To Build a Fire, which is based on it's a 13-minute film, I think that's right?
13, yeah.
On a Jack London story. Which has won prizes galore in festivals, so look out for that. And you also used to be, or still are, a composer, and you have a magazine, an online magazine, which you could subscribe to on composite.fr.
Called Score It magazine.
Score It, that's right. Score It magazine, about the use of music in film, TV, and games. So quite a range of backgrounds. Your particular speciality is colorization of black and white archive, and we're going to come to that later in the panel. And then on the far right is Ruhi Hamid. Ruhi is a director working across broadcast TV with recent work for the BBC, for Channel 4 and for Al Jazeera. And her most recent credit was Africa, A Journey in Music, and her episode on South Africa was actually shown on BBC 4 last night at 10 o'clock. So if you were in your hotel room and not at the Channel 4 party, you could have caught that. But it is now on iPlayer and will be on iPlayer for the next, BBC iPlayer will be there for the next 30 days. Her films, that one was quite a safe film for Ruhi, actually, even being in South Africa. I think her films often cover international stories in Africa, Asia, Europe, South America, pretty much everywhere, dealing with, I didn't mention Africa, yes I did mention Africa, dealing with social and political issues about women, religion, poverty, health and human rights. And certainly you do all your own filming, don't you, most of the time?
Yeah, all of the time actually, unless it's a high profile presenter like Jonathan Dimbleby, or one of those kind of high profile, then we get a camera crew. But I actually haven't filmed with a camera crew for the last 8 years, I would say.
Right. So you're very aware of what you're delivering in the edit to the post house, and you're making sure that hopefully it's not too rubbish before Katherine or Samuel get their hands on it. So, so I did want to turn to you, Ruhi, partly because you've had this film on just last night. I mean, what was it like making a film in such a sort of vibrant country as South Africa? And it's a musical film as well, so you're not in sort of shadowy dark rooms most of the time. What was that like as an experience?
Yeah, I mean, it made a great change for me. It was like a dream job because it was South Africa, a country that I love, music, which is music that I've grown up with from South Africa during the whole apartheid struggle, and thirdly, the vibrancy of the people and the sound. So this was actually a kind of a complete film in that you had to deal with all your senses. But ultimately, you know, a country like South Africa, the sound obviously for that film was so important, but so were the visuals. I mean, it's a visual medium that we're working with, so you have to make a feast for the eyes. And so you make editorial decisions all the time. But also, today, even though I'm doing all the filming myself, the production values have gone up so much. The demands are so high for broadcast television that it doesn't matter that I'm not a camera woman, you know, who's trained to do camera. But I've learned over the years as I've gone on, and the camera mediums have changed, and what we have to use has changed. So I was filming on a Canon C300, but I was also filming on GoPros. We were filming on an Osmo. We were using drones. And then we're filming in lots of different environments, lighting conditions, dark little rooms if you go into a hut with a musician. So, and because the kind of filming I do is very much on the go, we set sequences up, but then we let the presenter enter those sequences in as natural a way as possible. So you can't do any setup, you can't do any lighting. And so you are really, everything you do has got to go in camera. So you try your best to do all your exposures and your white balance right, but of course sometimes it's just impossible. So as a consequence, I mean, we, you know, rely on the grade, on the colorist, to bring that whole thing together, bring all those different mediums together so that there's a cohesive look, you know, so that the GoPro matches the C300, and if I was doing a C300 with an assistant camera person, the two C300s match. So there's so much matching to be done, which you cannot do on the ground, and therefore, you know, when it goes to the grade, it's so essential. It's kind of, for me, I love going into the grades because it's when you start painting your film, and it is art. And that is what film is. Ultimately, it is an art form. And we have to treat it that way. So every frame matters to me. And I think the grade is something that really lifts your film up, you know, when you're there.
Great. That's a terrific opening to the film. And I was looking at Katherine through it, and she said to me as it came up on the screen, she said, "It's so much better on the TV in front. You know, that's what it really looks like. So I'm sorry you couldn't see the TV on the front." But Katherine, when you were looking at that grade with a professional eye, I sort of had the sense that you were imagining what the original footage footage was that came through to you. Could you see what had been done? I mean, obviously that was the pre-title. Lots of different scenes there.
Yeah, you can tell that. Well, I can tell that you had a lot of variety of different cameras. You can spot the GoPros, but I mean the grade has brought it all together. But you can see where maybe the sky replacements have been put in, where maybe there wasn't blue sky, but someone's added a little touch of blue sky, things like that. But it all looks good. It's all come together really nicely. But yeah, you can spot it. You can spot what bits kind of, because it's stuff that I do on a day-to-day basis. So. But hopefully no one else spots it.
I mean, the challenge of that series was that it was filmed in 3 different countries, so Mali, Nigeria, and South Africa. So you want the series to look cohesive. However, you do also want it to have its own feel. You know, South Africa has got a certain kind of rhythm and tone to it, as does Nigeria and Mali. And so we tried to represent that. And also just looking at it reminded me, the challenges we had were that we had to film performances. So sometimes the performances were in nightclubs. So the lighting is kind of all over the place. Yeah. You know, how do you white balance that? So there were lots and lots of challenges. And one of the scenes we shot was with a young rapper. And we shot that on an Osmo, and we wanted it to feel like a pop video, a kind of a rap video.
Because I watched the whole show on the train on the way up, and I noticed that you did a different grade for when she's doing her bit camera. And using a different camera is a good way of doing that. But also you can tell that the grade was obviously treated differently to make it feel more like a music video.
Yeah.
So, Katherine, I mean, talk a little bit about your work at Halo, your day-to-day work. I mean, perhaps for people who haven't had the, you know, in the audience, who haven't had the experience of a grade from a post house on their film, then maybe they've had to do it on the tools that you get in Final Cut Pro or other editing software is available. Talk a little bit about what that experience is. What can you do? Is it about fixing problems, or is it about another artistic layer on the film?
It's all of those things. It's the first thing we're doing with documentaries particularly is giving it that sort of that look across that it is all been shot. It's been shot over several years, months, weeks in various conditions. You have to give it that cohesive kind of matching, even between two cameras. If you have an interview with two different people, even if you use the same camera, it's very unlikely that those two cameras are going to match perfectly. So your sort of first goal is to give it that cohesive look, and then on top of that you build on that. You build the different tones and the feel you want for your film on top of that, but you kind of have to have a good baseline of it all matching, or not necessarily matching, but fitting as it should do it within the story and the context of the story. And
do directors come to you and say, I want this sort of look? I remember when I was in the business of making films or even commissioning them, I would be, I'd talk about a film look, and that's what we used to say, and it was just about degrading the image so it didn't look so sharp and bright and shiny video.
There's definitely a language that you use in the grade. Everyone's slightly different, and it's kind of our job is actually interpreting what the director wants. So they can use languages like technical languages, like, oh, I want X amount of saturation and crushed blacks and extra contrast, all the rest of it. But another way of doing it, which I quite like actually, is a more emotive way of describing it. So like how I'd ask often, what are we feeling at this part of the story? How are we as the viewer meant to be relating to this particular scene or whatever? And you can take it on an emotional level as well, and then I can interpret that emotional language into colour and hue. So you kind of get the technical and the emotional all together to kind of try and essentially help us carry the story across to the viewer.
I think it might be good now to see the sort of before and after that you've done, which is more about, what would you say, is it a combination of fixing problems?
A selection of clips that I've got. I apologise for how crudely they were kind of put together on my iMovie at home. But essentially, the first just shows you a before of a camera with its exposure changes, like really sort of stepping from one to the other, so it's kind of popping, and then how we can use the grade to fix that. The second one is essentially a white balance fix that we can do in the grade, which I've got, I think, in picture-in-picture. And then the last two clips is much further down the line, and basically doing day for nights, recreating entire scenes by adding fire, flickering stars. It's like the complete other extreme. So there's kind of technical fixes that you do on a day-to-day basis, and then there's a kind of more extreme stuff that you can do in the grade.
So that, you know, those are just a few of the tools at your disposal, I think, aren't they?
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, there are probably many other things that you can do with the grade. I think we'll move on now, and we'll probably come back to you both at the end. But I now want to move on to one of the other aspects of grading that we're going to cover here, and that is quite a relatively new one, perhaps, but quite specific. It's the colorization of black and white archives. So, Samuel, your company's in Paris, but you're working also with a British production company, aren't you? Arrow Media.
Yeah. Tom Brisley is in the room.
I don't know if Tom's in the room. Is Tom in the room? There he is. Tom Brisley from Arrow Media is in the room, and you're going to talk a bit about what that process actually is, and about this series that you worked on together, America in Colour. And just to say, we're, as I think it says up there, it says SBS next to my name because I'm the international consultant for SBS Australia, public channel, and Joseph Maxwell is in the second row there. He's our head of docs, our docs commissioner, and he has commissioned Australia in Colour. Can you see what we did there? So from America in Colour to Australia in Colour, which is being made by an Australian production company in collaboration with Arora, and Samuel is just beginning the work on that, aren't you?
We can show you one still already.
Yeah, so only one still, but Joseph can talk a bit about it as well. But we want to hear about what is colorization of archive? Is it just like I can do on my phone or put on a color filter? I can try. Okay. Or do I have to hire you to do it?
Yeah, it's better. Well, actually, colorization of black and white footage is very specific to historical documentaries using archive footage. I have a background in documentary and history, so I worked on documentary films, historical documentary films for French TV, and France 2 and France 3 were willing to put more and more colorization in their programs, thinking that it could bring history more easily to the younger audiences.
So these are the two main, I guess, the two main public channels in France, France 2 and France 3.
Yeah, exactly.
And France 3 in particular is a historical, shows a lot of history programs.
Yeah, like maybe 100 hours per year. So yeah, that was the story at the beginning, and so I worked on 4 or 5 documentaries for French TV in this approach, and I met with Tom Brisley at MIPCOM and showed him a few images I worked on, and Tom saw something totally different, like why wouldn't we do a program about the history of a country, but putting the colorization at the top of the program, like not thinking we use it to bring it to the younger audience, but we use it as a main point to tell a story and make it more close to us. And
it's the way of selling the program in a way, isn't it?
Yeah, actually. And I was very interested by this approach because it was the opposite. It was not. It's better to do a program in black and white, but for a marketing point of view, we will put color on it, and it won't bring something very natural to it. But I mean, this history happened in color. The people who filmed it, they saw it in color, and just that the fact they didn't have a color camera at that time, they couldn't print it in color. So we're just bringing color back to history. And
so it's not really
it's very interesting for me.
Yes, I suppose it's colorization, but it's more like restoring it to the reality of what it would have been. That's
that's the mission I gave to myself was to go more and more into details and do some extensive researches, so that we didn't let anything to the chance. And so we could verify for every shot of every film, every object, every uniform, every building, every car. So for every program we colorize today, everything is really carefully checked, and we really do a big job with historians and researchers about that.
We'll look into that in a second. Let's look first actually at the, if we could have the clip of the trailer of the first of America in Colour. So excuse the spelling mistake on the title there. We'll make sure Tom Brisley corrects that. No, that series is made for the Smithsonian Channel in the US, and I think it's been incredibly successful for them. And I think we've seen those in colour series, certainly in France, And I think also here, we're now becoming used to it, perhaps a little bit used to it, but I still find it quite thrilling to see those images, having grown up on the black and white versions of them. So, I mean, can you talk us through, Samuel, how you actually do it? I think this is where we should bring in the next clip and the pictures, and you can talk over those.
Next clip, and I can explain.
Exactly, and
quite a long and delicate process.
Exactly, and you know, you were talking about historical, using historians and historical research, and that is, as you know, that means going back to written accounts as well, doesn't it? And trying to find out what the colour was on everything. So tell us how technically it works. How do you what happens when you get this black and white piece of archive? What do you then do with it?
So after the edit is finished and approved by editorially by the producer on the channel, all the low-res screeners are replaced by HD footage that needs to be scanned back to the original film. So every archive library go back to their films, there are 35mm or 60mm, and scan it in 2K and 4K, and then we replace it in the edit. And yeah, so this is from the 1930s in New York. And so then when I receive the black and white, for example, for one episode there is 500-600 different shots, and for every single shot we need to analyze the black and white footage, determine every object and do some researches to investigate and find out what color are the things that we see. So,
and I mean, is there? Do you have to make best guesses with some of it? I mean, perhaps.
In the worst case, yes.
That was Roosevelt, wasn't it? But you wouldn't know whether that was a black car or a red car, would you? That's
the main point, actually. I try to let really very few percentage of the decision I take to chance. So, for example, a city shot like that, I need to point out every building and make some correspondence. And I cannot take a city shot from today because some buildings changed, and so sometimes there is some exact correspondence from today, but sometimes we need to go back to some postcards that were done at that time, some drawings, as some institution, museums, some collectors, some reenactors that have some uniforms and dresses. Yeah, that's for the Beatles, for example. For this scene, there was a photograph. We did some color photographs, so we could do an exact correspondence on the black and white footage, so it works very well. And yeah, so we determine some elements depending on if it's a key figure, historical figure. We can verify how the person, like Roosevelt, was dressed this day in particular, and it takes a lot of time, but we always find the answer. And sometimes we need to cross like 3-4 different sources, like oral sources, written sources, visual sources.
And in terms of the equipment you're using, is it something that you could do on low-end equipment, or is this really? Are you sort of hand painting? Hand painting the colors in.
Actually, there is no software in like commercial software to do it. So we developed a specific tool, which is a mix between it could be Photoshop and After Effects and Nuke and Silhouette for the shape and edges animation, but. Yeah, we needed something very specific because on 500 shots you need something that is very, very useful and practical.
So when it comes to just so I can understand it, and I think when it comes to moving shots, you're doing it frame by frame, or you're then mapping the color from one frame onto another?
I start determining the objects on 1 or 2 different frames of every shot, so creating some shapes objects and associating some textures and color on it. And then it's used as a reference file, and we recreate the movement of the object depending on the motion. It's I would like to say easier than traditional animation because you already have a canvas, like the shapes and the edges are already existing. But yeah, it's still
a labor-intensive process.
We cannot automatize it. We can track it. There is good tracking algorithm at the moment, but the fact is that the footage were not shot yesterday on 4K cameras, and when you have 20 different sources on a film, yeah, sometimes on one shot you can have very sharp edges, but on the next one it will be more blurred, and you need to fix it manually. So yeah. Okay,
so a complicated process. I wanted to bring in Joseph Maxwell, who's, as I said, was the commissioning editor on the series now in production, Australia in Colour. So Joseph, tell us a little bit about why you commissioned it and why having colorized archive is interesting for an audience.
So in a way it's relevant to look at our channel. We've got this remit at SBS about looking at diversity within Australia, celebrating immigration and the diversity. There's a kind of very Anglo image to Australia, and we want to kind of debunk that because it's actually a story of immigration into Australia. 50% of Australians are either born overseas or a parent is. The trouble is it means we often end up telling the same story over and over again. And the kind of the heart of the sort of Australian story is in 1900, when Australia was federated as a country, they set up this thing called the White Australia policy, which was that no non-whites could immigrate into Australia, which was kind of broken. But we've told that story so many different ways, so many different times, and I kind of go, Christ, our audience has heard that. When Tom pitched this, what was so interesting is we suddenly went, actually, we can tell this in a fresh way. And it's really interesting for us that A, it is a marketing tool, absolutely. But B, it's also kind of interesting because it has been a very white story, and then there's been the black story of our indigenous history, and suddenly telling it in colour actually reveals this beautiful multicultural history. So it kind of plays for us on a number of levels. It really works. But I'm selling it, but I've no idea. That's the very first single frame of colour that they showed up earlier that I've actually seen of it. So I have high expectations, but no reality yet.
So you've
do you have the still there, Darren?
Oh yeah, have we? We haven't actually seen it still. Yes. This still is from Australia in colour. I'm sorry, I missed that. Let's just look at it.
Actually, it's still taken from archive footage. So it's not a photograph. It's really one photogram from a sequence, and it's quite. It's a very famous footage in Australia, and so I got a bit of pressure on it.
Okay, and I mean, Joseph, sorry. Do you think that the audience? I mean, if you did it with the black and white footage and presumably some colour footage, original colour footage existing, do you think we wouldn't get an audience for it?
Well, Tom Brisley has promised me it will get us brilliant audiences by colorising it, so I'm totally disbelieving him. No, I do think there's an accessibility to it. I think it's really interesting as you look at some of those images of how certain things cut through, and I think there are certain images that will. And for me, I'm kind of intrigued by those really iconic footage that then you see fresh in a whole new light, and I think that's really intriguing and powerful. And then there's really interesting home movies that have a kind of personal micro history they tell you that, again, I think they will resonate. But it's a real challenge to edit, though, because I've just been looking at the black and white, quite grainy, kind of cutting copy archive, and have never seen it in its full glory. So it'd be really interesting to see what it actually does look like.
So it is a bit of a leap of faith, because the colorization, as I understand it, is happening now. It's just starting now, isn't it? Is that right? The colorization of the archive of Australia in colour, you're only doing it now.
Yeah. It's a leap of faith, but also, on the other hand, it's a brilliant, I mean, for us, the colorization is an element, but it's just a great way. We are telling a fantastic story of Australian history, 1900 to 1960. So the fabric of the writing, the narrative, the content that we've got is already very rich as well. The colorization helps us to market that in a fresh way and see it in a fresh way.
Great, thank you very much, Joseph. I wanted to come back now to Ruhi and Hamid and Ruhi and Katherine, and please do think of some questions. We're more or less on time. Ruhi, you're not dealing with archive. Most of the time, I'm not sure I've ever seen a film of yours with any archive apart from perhaps a bit of news archive in it. Setting that aside, when you think of a film, do you look? Are you thinking of the mood that you want to portray as an element of the story? Is the look of it part of the story? I'm thinking of the series you did, the Traffickers.
Yeah, no, totally. I think every film does have a tone and a mood, which I kind of see in colour. I'm a former graphic designer, so I was brought up on colour in a way. We had to study what colour did, what the tonal, what tones go with each other. So colour is always something. I mean, I think we all kind of dream in colour. So for that colour is just so much part of the editorial in a way. So The Traffickers was a series about trafficking, an 8-part series, and I did a film in the Congo about child trafficking under the guise of international adoption. So that's a dark story. And we wanted the films to have that feel and look to it. So you're creating a mood and you're creating an emotion. I think that was the thing, is using the colouring as a way of making the audience feel what it was, in a sense. It's an emotional response. Yeah, it's difficult to explain it, isn't it? Because it's a very subtle thing. Yeah. It's the way music can be used emotively, but I think colour can be used emotively as well. It tells a story. It's part of the palette of your entire film. So you're making editorial choices, but you're also making emotional choices that are subjective in a way. And so you as a director will bring that to it, because you have a vision of your film. You sort of see it. You see it in your head when you're making it and when you're in the edit. So apart from all those technical requirements of matching everything up, you still are also trying to create a tone for your film. And so The Traffickers, I think, probably is a good one to show.
We'll see a clip. I'm sort of conscious that, again, we're showing the pre-title of it, which I know, is going to be it's shots from throughout the series, isn't it? So it's not. Yeah. This is the generic title opening, and I'm sorry about that. That's probably my fault for not choosing the right clip. But it does certainly show what a moody series it is, or the different types of moods, I think, in the series. So this was an 8-part series made Lightbox by Lightbox for Fusion, which is an American channel, and the series is now available on Netflix, so you can check it out there. So if we can now see Ruhi's second clip, please. Great. So I think I was being a bit hard on myself. Actually, that was the specific title, pre-title for the series, and. Actually, by listening to you all, I'm now getting very acutely aware of of how these things are graded. I mean, again, Katherine, when you look at something like that, would that have been a nice challenge to do something in the Congo in such different environments?
Yeah, absolutely, and it's every single story and program is completely different. Like you say, it comes with its own emotional baggage, not necessarily from the content, but from the director and the vision that the director has. So, yeah, the beauty of being a colorist is that each job is completely different, and so you can just bring a new thing to it every time. But yeah, I can see, it's very contrasty, it's very heavy, like the colors are quite dark, moody, which suits that emotional feeling that you have with that subject matter. So yeah, it does all come across. People might not be aware of it, but like you say, just talking about it, you sort of find yourself thinking about it in a slightly different way, and it is sometimes slightly subconscious, almost if you're noticing the grade. Maybe you've gone too far. You want someone to be feeling something but not have it rammed down your throat. You want to feel something, but it's not, you know, you can be subtle with it. It doesn't have to be too obvious.
It was interesting looking at this screen and that one, and actually they were both out.
Yeah,
this was oversaturated. That was, I was looking, I was thinking, oh God, I don't remember that being so pink. And then this one was actually really not, you couldn't really see the grade in this, I'm sorry.
Which is actually one of the biggest issues, is no matter what, we sit in and work on very expensive lined up monitors in a room where we're like, yep, that looks perfect, and it sounds perfect in the dub, but we have no control of how everyone else watches it, whether it be on their phone, their TV, whatever they watch it on, the lighting conditions. There's so many things that are going to slightly throw what you initially, but you have to have a standard,
a reference, and that's what I wanted to kind of finish on, actually, because I know there's often a debate in the UK, I don't know if anybody else picks up on this, about particularly sort of the kind of period dramas that have been being made in the last few years, the sort of Charles Dickens adaptations and things like that, about how muddy and grey and monochrome they look. And personally, when I watch things like that, I find them really hard to watch because I can't actually see them. And then there was another drama, I should have written down the title, last year, which deliberately set out to have a vivid, saturated look. It was set in Edwardian England. I can't remember I don't know if anybody else remembers the title of it, and had Haley, somebody in it. Anyway, it was a really, people noticed how bright the colours were, and the makers said, I remember reading, they said, we did that because that is what people in Edwardian England thought their society was. It was like the sort of the swinging 60s. It was colourful, there was fashion, there was, advertising, industrialisation. And I think it really brought home to me that you can totally change the way people view it by the strength of grade, if you like, that you choose.
Yeah, and your choice of how to approach it is going to have a massive effect on it. And there is slight fashions in grading as well. Like, you'll see kind of, people will be like, oh, I really liked the look on whatever. For ages it was Transformers, the film Transformers. I don't know what, everyone would be like, I want the look of that film. It was all kind of the teal and orange look that everyone wanted to make their
teal and orange?
Yes. Where
sounds like a paint combination.
Yeah, everything's really metallic looking, but everyone's skin looks overly, it was like a fashion that everyone wanted things to look that way. So people sort of follow, there are trends, but it's...
so what's the current, is there a current trend that we should look out for?
To be honest, I can't think of one now. You only sort of see them in hindsight, to be honest. But there was a stage where everyone wanted everything very contrasty, and now I think a lot of people have gone the other way, and they work in log where everything looks very milky, and a lot of people actually get quite attached to the log footage, and so quite often they're like, oh no, leave it quite...
Sorry, just explain that. What's log footage?
So log footage is, if you have filmed something, and it's short for logarithmic, but essentially it'll look very milky, like it, very faded, desaturated, and it's how the camera will record the raw footage, and then we grade it to make it look more vibrant and contrasty. But a lot of people are actually liking that initial look. It looks quite kind of, it can look a bit flat, but some people like that, and I think it's because they're so used to seeing it contrasty. People want a difference, essentially. So people get into a trend, and then everyone wants to buck that trend, and so you go in and out of...
Can I just bring in Samuel, and then we're going to go to some questions, but do you think there's a difference between audiences? Do you think different parts of the audience want different grades? Do younger people want more vibrant colours and older people want darker ones, or is that being too facile? It probably is.
No, I'm not sure about that. It's not really. I think it's more in my what concerns me. It's more giving no color or just color, but I mean, just to bounce on the color grade, linking to the colorization. I work more specifically about color grading at the very beginning of the process. So when I receive the black and white footage, because when you have 20 different sources, the quality and the contrast of the black and white is very random, so we need to do a first light grade to have a cohesive look of the black and white, then optimize it in order to put some specific color on it. And after colorization, I have like 600 different clips that need to be also.
That's right. So you still then do another grade, don't you?
To bring them back in the editorial, and also do a last pass of color grade to finalize the contrast, the saturation, to enhance one part of the footage, because
we did that at Halo, didn't we?
Ross at Halo did the first season and
of the American Color. So look,
and that's very important also to have this last pass, because I'm working on every single clips, but it's very good to have a new eye on the footage, so that we can finalize it. That's it.
I don't think that's. I'm not sure that's a bell telling me to shut up. But
was I too long?
So let's have some. Let's just have some questions. Are there some? Yes, some questions. I'm going to take one over there on the right, and then this lady in the front row, and then you, sir, in the middle, and then I think we can come to you at the back. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Question for Katherine, really. So when you receive an edit, obviously a kind of finished edit, and you start the process of the grade, you talk about creating layers, and you talk about, starting with the baseline, trying to get the cameras up. Just run us quickly through what your kind of process is. So how many times are you going through that? And is it a case of, your first one is, okay, I'm going to get the contrast to match, or I'm going to get the color to match, and just quickly run us through that kind of process of how many times you're going through it and what your kind of considerations are at those points. That'd be really helpful. Thank you.
Sure. So all colorists work differently. I know some people that go through the whole film and just do their matching, and then they go back and they go through and they do their maybe sky replacements, or they do certain things. I personally do it on a shot-by-shot basis. I kind of try to watch the film first, if I can. If there's time, there's not always time, but I try to watch it so you get an idea of you get an idea of the story, the tone, and have a conversation, preferably with the director beforehand as well. So you kind of have an overall idea in your head. Then you watch it through, knowing that you're going to have maybe some tricky areas to spend more time on, because time management is actually really important. Because another issue is just budgets and time frames are so small, and you want to treat every film like it's a feature film, and you've got weeks and months to work on it. But with most broadcast TV programs, you have a day, 10 hours sometimes to do a 60-minute program. So you have to kind of manage your time quite precisely. So you try to work out areas that you might need to spend a bit more time on because of the balance isn't quite right. Or you've got a particularly tricky scene where they want day to look like night, day for night or something like that. But I generally work with, the first thing is trying to get the scene to match up. So I am going back and forth amongst the scene a bit. So I do the grade, go through, and I might suddenly think, actually, I feel like another tone might be slightly better. So you're kind of tweaking a little bit. Once you're happy with that, moving on with doing any other additional layers. Like if it's, sometimes the sky is burnt out, there's no detail in the sky, and sometimes it's quite nice to put a little bit of something in, not necessarily blue, but some kind of texture in the sky, which we can do. And if time allows, so again, you're managing your time and if there's time for that. But it's kind of the first thing you're doing is matching the colours in the scene and making sure that feels right, and that it also matches the tone of the story being told. That's the number one priority, because that's kind of, without that, there's no point really doing the grade.
Okay, let's move to the question that was there, lady in the second row.
Thanks, and you've touched on some of the issues behind my question, actually. I've loved hearing about grading, because it's more my territory, but the colorization, again, it's back down to time management, but I would hope that you would write an edit and then colorize a rough cut, or do you have to colorize a fine cut? Because if it's all about changing and lifting and shifting the mood and tone of a story that we think we know, if you're doing that with colorizing at the end, rather than while you're constructing the narrative, that must be a battle to get the story really informed by the colorizing, not just
Do you mean that you're discovering? You might discover things in the colour that might then want you. Once you colour, might then want you to change the edit.
Not necessarily explicitly, consciously, but pacing of cuts, but also tone of the writing. Certainly, tone of the voiceover if you're doing.
That's very interesting because actually, when I started, I received some edits that were really cut, like with 2 seconds or 3 seconds clips. And when I sent back the colorized footage to the director, he was a bit shocked by the fact that he wanted the shots to last longer.
Yes.
And so the second time we worked together, the edit reflection about the edits and the cuts was very different. So no, I really try to intervene and talk to the editor and to the director very at the beginning of the edits to tell them what can be the impact of bringing all those details also on the footage on the editorial, so that they have it in mind and they think about it also when they choose to cut one shot shorter or to make it last longer. So yeah, that's a very important point. Yeah.
Oh.
With handles rather than.
No, we cannot colorize something that won't be in the edit at the end because it's too much work.
So we're going to take this gentleman here. Here we go.
This is about colorization. Do you just work from film? Or what about colorizing from video formats, or where there is no master film material?
Yeah, actually, when we can, we go back to the original film, but yeah, it really depends on if the library knows where is the original material. Sometimes we need to work on a VHS master that I need to retexture and to
what are the problems inherent in that then? Are they different from working? Is it harder to work from VHS?
Yeah, of course, it's terrible. No, because I mean, most of the detailing and the natural colors I can put depends on the richness of the black and white. I mean, when you see a histogram in black and white, if you do a scan with 2 flashes per photogram, then you will have a very rich black and white with a lot of what's the word?
Okay, we are getting into the technical. The light is flashing very insistently at me now. So do come back at 2 o'clock, and if you can now give a big round of applause for Ruhi, Katherine, and Samuel. Thank you.